They told you it was just a release, just a physical act, just a way to cope, to pass the time, to calm the storm inside. But what if I told you, every time you reach for that screen, that fantasy, that fleeting pleasure, you are opening a spiritual doorway, one you never meant to unlock, because this isn't just physical, it's spiritual warfare in disguise. You think you're alone, but something watches. You think it's harmless, but something feeds. And the scariest part, you've been calling it normal. Masturbation isn't addictive because your body is weak. It's addictive because your soul is being drained. One secret session at a time. The chains aren't on your hands. They're around your spirit. And the enemy doesn't need to fight you with swords if he can seduce you with screens. This is why you feel more tired after, more anxious, more hollow, because something was taken, something holy, something royal. And if you keep listening, you'll discover why the most dangerous war isn't the one outside you, it's the one happening inside, and how to win it before it devours the destiny you were born to carry. There's a war happening, not on battlefields with bombs and bullets, but in bedrooms, in thoughts, and in the private corners of your soul. And the weapon, pleasure. The most dangerous battles are the ones you don't even know you're in. That's how the enemy wins, not by overpowering you, but by seducing you, by wrapping chains in silk, by making destruction feel like relief. Pleasure has become the perfect disguise. Masturbation isn't sold to you as spiritual collapse. It's sold as therapy, freedom, even self-love. But behind that moment of dopamine is a system of spiritual sabotage. You think you're choosing pleasure, but pleasure is choosing you. You think it's about stress relief, but it's really about soul decay. Every time you give in, it's not just a loss of energy, it's a surrender of authority. You were made to govern your body, not be governed by it. But this war has flipped the throne, and now your flesh calls the shots. And make no mistake, the enemy doesn't want your body, he wants your spirit, your fire, your future. He uses lust as a leash, masturbation as a ritual, and pleasure as a portal. You're not just feeding an urge, you're feeding a force that's working to numb your discernment, fog your vision, and weaken your walk with God. Look deep. Why is it so hard to stop? Why do you feel a dark pull when no one is watching? Because spirits don't need doors, they need agreements. And every time you say yes to the screen, the image, the climax, you're shaking hands in the spirit realm, and those handshakes come with chains. This is why you can pray but still feel powerless, fast but still feel empty. You're fighting symptoms while the root still rules, and that root is hidden in the lie that this is just physical. It never was. Until you recognize that masturbation is a spiritual trap masked as a biological need, you'll keep losing a war you weren't taught to see. But once your eyes open, truly open, you'll understand this isn't about urges, it's about identity. And it's time to reclaim what was stolen, not with willpower alone, but with truth that sets your soul on fire. 2. The lie of release and the theft of royal seed. They call it a release, but what if I told you it's not a release, it's a robbery? You're not letting something go, you're giving something sacred away. Your seed is not just fluid, it's divine currency. It carries memory, legacy, and spiritual authority. Every culture that ever valued power, from ancient priests to warrior kings, knew that they guarded it with their lives, because they understood one truth. Your seed is your strength. The modern world mocks that idea. It trains men to devalue themselves. It sells you the lie that pleasure is harmless, that spilling your seed means nothing. But demons don't attack what's meaningless, they attack what's royal. When you masturbate, you're not just losing energy, you're losing identity. You're surrendering your throne for a moment of numbness. What was designed to build nations, father generations, and anoint kings, is now being wasted in the dark, in silence, for nothing. There is a reason kings in the Bible were warned against loose living. Samson wasn't defeated by warriors, he was undone by lust. His strength wasn't taken by force, it was given away, drop by drop, just like yours. Why do you think you feel shame afterward? Why the guilt? Why the fog? Because your spirit knows what your mind denies. Something was stolen. The enemy doesn't want your pleasure, he wants your purpose, and he steals it by making you believe it's just a release. Every time you masturbate, you're agreeing with a lie. You're telling your body it has no higher you. You're telling your soul it's okay to live beneath its design. You're leaking power, authority, vision. But here's the truth. You were never meant to waste what was designed to build. You are not a machine of release. You are a vessel of creation. You are the carrier of kingdoms, the bearer of legacy, the image of God. Your seed is holy. And when you begin to honor it, guard it, and walk in that awareness, the spiritual chains begin to break. The fog begins to lift. And what once felt like addiction becomes a battleground you no longer lose. This isn't about repression. It's about reclaiming the royalty you were never meant to trade for cheap thrill. 3. When you touch yourself, something touches back. There is no such thing as a private sin. You think it's just you alone in a room behind locked doors, with no one watching. But in the spiritual realm there is no privacy. The moment lust enters your thoughts, something awakens. And it's not just desire, it's presence. When you engage in masturbation, especially through the lens of pornography, you're not just acting on a physical impulse, you're forming a spiritual agreement. The eyes are not neutral, the mind is not passive. Lust is a spirit, and it doesn't just observe, it responds. You open yourself up to something that begins to take residence. Every time you give in, you're not alone. You're building an altar, one that doesn't glorify God, but feeds demonic energy. You're saying, I give permission. And spirits don't need much, just a crack, just a doorway. And masturbation becomes the ritual that keeps that door open night after night, thought after thought. People wonder why they feel depressed, anxious, heavy, tired after they watch porn and masturbate, why they feel spiritually distant, numb, and directionless. It's because something touched them back, something took from them. Because you didn't just lose semen, you lost clarity, boldness, spiritual fire. You gave a piece of your soul for a moment of fake intimacy. That's why quitting feels harder than breaking a drug addiction, because it's not just chemicals in your brain, it's spiritual bondage. The longer you stay entangled, the more these spirits embed themselves into your identity. You start thinking lustfully, dreaming lustfully, seeing people as objects, not because you're evil, but because you're no longer the one in full control. And here's the terrifying truth. When you masturbate, you create a mirror. You gaze at lust, and lust gazes back. You reflect what you behold. Over time, you're not just watching evil, you're becoming one with it. That's why deliverance isn't just about stopping the act. It's about breaking the connection, renouncing the access. Because what you touch in secret eventually touches every part of your life, your relationships, your purpose, your peace. And if you don't close the door, it will keep walking in until there's nothing left of the real you. Not a habit, a ritual of defilement. It starts as a habit, something small, something secret, just you, a screen, and a few stolen minutes. But over time the habit transforms, it mutates, it becomes something darker, something spiritual. What once felt like a release starts to feel like a ritual, and that's because it is. Masturbation isn't just a routine, it's a repeated spiritual transaction. Every time you do it, you're not just using your body, you're participating in a ritual of self-defilement. You offer your seed on an altar, made of shame, lust and isolation, and every offering invites something in, a deeper darkness, a thicker fog, a louder silence. You don't even feel like yourself afterward. Why? Because you just traded clarity for confusion, energy for exhaustion, purpose for passivity, and you know it. Something inside you whispers, this isn't right, but you keep going back. Not because you want to, but because something else is you too. That's not a habit, that's spiritual slavery. Demons don't need blood sacrifices anymore. Your seed is enough, because it contains more than sperm. It contains vision, power, vitality and divine essence. When you give it away to a fantasy, you're not just wasting it, you're handing it over to forces that hate your calling. And the ritual always looks the same. It starts with isolation, then boredom, then a whisper. Just once more, you obey. The screen lights up, you act, then comes the shame, the guilt, the regret, and finally, the promise. Next time, I'll stop. But the ritual repeats. You're not addicted to pleasure, you're addicted to escape, to numbing the wounds you never healed, to silencing the voice of God inside you that's begging you to rise. And the enemy knows this. That's why he keeps you stuck in the loop. This isn't about feeling bad, it's about waking up. Because the moment you recognize what's happening, the spell begins to break. You're not weak, you're warped, but you can be restored. Masturbation isn't harmless, it's a ceremony of self-sabotage dressed in convenience. The question is, how many more rituals will you perform before you finally realize you're the sacrifice? Demons weaponize pleasure to dismantle purpose. Demons don't need to chain you with fear if they can seduce you with pleasure. That's the trap most never see coming, because when something feels good, it must be harmless, right? Wrong. Pleasure, in the wrong hands, is a spiritual weapon, and it's being used to strip men of their calling, one climax at a time. Every time you indulge in lust, you think you're gaining satisfaction, but you're losing something more valuable, clarity. Porn and masturbation dull your spirit. They silence your intuition. They mute the divine frequency you were created to walk in. You were designed for direction, to lead, to create, to protect, but lust hijacks that energy and recycles it into self-destruction. The more you feed the appetite of lust, the more your purpose becomes foggy. You'll notice it. Your drive fades. Your motivation dies. Your vision weakens. Why? Because the very energy that was meant to build your kingdom is being poured out onto your screen. Demons don't need to take your purpose by force. They just need to get you addicted to false pleasure. Then you'll forfeit it yourself. You'll stop praying. You'll stop planning. You'll stop leading. You'll settle. You'll stay stuck. Because a man who lives for lust can never walk in legacy. Even worse, it starts to distort your identity. You begin to see women as objects, not sacred reflections of God. You begin to view yourself as a slave to impulse, not a vessel of power. This isn't just sin, it's spiritual sabotage. It's strategic, it's targeted. Your enemy doesn't fear a man who's perfect. He fears a man who's focused, and focus cannot coexist with lust. You can't serve divine purpose while bowing to a screen in secret. You can't call yourself a king while spilling royal seed in darkness. The weapon is pleasure. The goal is your purpose. And until you see that, you'll keep trading your power for a few seconds of escape. But once you recognize the cost, once you realize how hell uses pleasure to poison destiny, everything changes. You begin to guard your eyes, you begin to fight back, and you remember, what feels good isn't always what leads to good, because the devil doesn't need to kill your purpose if he can just convince you to waste it. 6. The power they don't want you to reclaim. They don't fear your body, they fear what's locked inside it. The truth is, the greatest threat to darkness is a man who has mastery over his sexual energy, because once you take that energy back, you become focused, fearless, and full of fire. Semen is not just fluid, it's life force, it's creative power, the same force that can bring new life into the world, when retained, redirected, and refined, becomes spiritual dynamite. It's your fuel for vision, drive, discipline, and divine alignment. And that's why demons hate when you hold it. Because when you stop spilling it for cheap pleasure, you start using it to build spiritual muscle. Your mind sharpens, your voice deepens with authority. Your presence becomes commanding. Your goals become non-negotiable. The men who change the world don't leak their power to pixels. They conserve it, convert it, and channel it toward purpose. That's what made the prophets different. That's what made warriors legendary. They didn't waste their fire, they forged it into legacy. But look at today. Men are weakened not by war but by Wi-Fi, seduced by screens, emasculated by algorithms, spiritually emptied by lust loops that never end. The enemy doesn't need to kill you, he just needs you addicted, distracted, drained. You ever wonder why the minute you try to retain your seed, life suddenly gets harder, more temptations, more attacks? It's because hell notices. The moment you stop serving lust, you step onto a battlefield, because now you're rising, and rising men must be resisted. They don't want you to wake up. They don't want you to realize that your sexual energy, when guarded, makes you magnetic, disciplined, and dangerous to darkness. This is why semen retention isn't a trend, it's warfare. This is why purity isn't old-fashioned, it's a weapon. When you reclaim this power, you begin to operate differently. You no longer chase women, they notice you. You no longer waste time, you dominate it. You no longer feel small because the spirit within you starts roaring again. They don't want you to reclaim your power, because when you do, they lose control of your future. 7. The death cycle of shame and the path of resurrection. Shame is not just an emotion, it's a spiritual prison. And for many, the cycle of masturbation becomes less about lust and more about shame. You fall, you regret, you promise never again, and yet a few days later you're back in the same pit. Why? Because shame doesn't just hurt you, it binds you. The enemy knows after tempting you into lust, he becomes your accuser. First the seducer, then the executioner. He whispers, just one more time, it's not that serious. And the moment it's over, he says, see, you're worthless. God's done with you. You'll never break free. That's not conviction. That's condemnation. And they are not the same. Conviction calls you back to God. Condemnation tells you to hide from him. You don't break this cycle by just trying harder. You break it by coming out of hiding. God cannot heal what you keep buried. The shame loses power the moment you bring it into the light. Through prayer, through accountability, through brutal honesty. Remember, even the prodigal son didn't get clean before he went home. He was still filthy when his father ran to him. God doesn't wait for you to get clean. He makes you clean. Resurrection begins when you stop identifying with your failure. You are not a slave to urges. You are not your last mistake. You are not too far gone. Every great man of God, every prophet, preacher, and warrior had their moment of collapse. David, a man after God's heart, fell into sexual sin, but what made him rise again was not perfection. It was repentance. Shame tells you to quit. God tells you to rise, not because you've earned it, but because he has already won it. When you fall, the enemy wants to define you by the dirt, but God sees what's still inside you, even under the guilt, under the mess, under the habit. The cycle ends the moment you declare, I'm not going to die here. Not in shame, not in secret, not in this pit, because resurrection isn't just for Christ. It's for every chosen one who dares to believe. There is still purpose on my name. 8. You were never meant to be a slave. You were not created to be ruled by your urges. You were not designed to kneel before lust like it's your God. You were born in the image of the Most High, chosen, crowned, and called. And yet, every time you give in to that impulse, every time you bow to that false pleasure, you trade your divine identity for a few seconds of silence that never truly satisfies. This is not just about quitting a habit. It's about reclaiming your throne. Because lust doesn't just want your attention. It wants your authority. It wants to strip you of your clarity, your conviction, and your spiritual backbone. Slavery to masturbation is subtle. It doesn't chain your hands. It chains your mind. It whispers lies. You can't stop. You've gone too far to turn back. You're too broken. But let me tell you the truth. You are not powerless. You are not too far gone. You are not what you did in the dark. You are a temple of fire, not a cage of shame. You carry the breath of God, and that breath was never meant to be silenced by addiction. The moment you stop identifying with your weakness and start identifying with your calling, the chains begin to crack. The devil wants you to think this is just about pleasure, but he knows the real prize is your purpose. Because a man addicted to lust is too distracted to lead, too numb to feel, too drained to build. You were not made for cycles of regret. You were made to rise in wisdom, to walk in dominion, to speak with power, and to stand unshaken. Freedom isn't found in trying harder. It's found in seeing clearer, seeing yourself not as a slave fighting for freedom, but as a son reclaiming his birthright. And yes, you will be tempted, but temptation is not sin. Surrender is. And every time you resist, every time you say no, every time you choose vision over urge, you are breaking generational curses. You are rewriting your story. You were never meant to be a slave. You were born to rule over what once ruled you. So rise. Take back what's yours. Hell is terrified of a man who remembers who he really is. Masturbation is not harmless. It is not neutral. It's not self-love. It's self-sabotage dressed in pleasure. And the longer you stay blind to the spiritual cost, the deeper you fall into a cycle designed to break your divine identity. You weren't born to be numb. You weren't born to chase shadows behind screens. You weren't created to live your life in loops, bound by your urges, defeated by your thoughts, and drowning in guilt. You were born to feel fully, to see clearly, and to walk in purpose. The reason it feels so hard to quit isn't just because it's a habit. It's because there are spiritual forces attached to your fall. Every time you bow to lust, you feed what wants to destroy you. You renew the contract with what hates your calling. That's why you feel so tired, so confused, so distant from God afterward. Because you didn't just give your body away. You gave away your clarity, your confidence, your kingdom. But listen closely. You can take it all back. Your seed is sacred. Your time is sacred. Your mind is sacred. And when you begin to see yourself as sacred again, the addiction starts to break. Because no demon can hold a man who remembers his worth. No lust can conquer a soul that burns with holy fire. You think this is just about quitting, but it's about becoming the man who doesn't need to escape his reality, because he's busy transforming it. becoming the woman who doesn't bow to cravings, because she knows she was made to birth purpose, not emptiness. It's not about white-knuckling your urges. It's about raising your standard, about realizing your life is too powerful, your soul too precious, and your destiny too urgent to be sold for a moment of pleasure. Hell is terrified of the day you wake up, terrified of the moment you stop feeding it, terrified of the version of you that walks in purity, strength and spiritual clarity, because that version cannot be manipulated, cannot be distracted, cannot be owned. That version is dangerous. That version is free. So now the choice is yours. Stay in the loop, or step into the fire that purifies instead of burns. You were never meant to be a slave. You were meant to be a warrior, a vessel of glory, a light in the darkness. And if you rise now, if you break the cycle today, the heavens will not only witness it, they will celebrate it. Because one man free is 1,000 men awakened. And that man could be you.